You made it.
Yeah, we did.
Great to have you here, Chuck.
Thank you. I'm glad to be anywhere.
Well, it's such a joy to have Roger Kemp here on the platform. As many of you know, Roger started with the Swindolls when Cynthia used to tussle up his hair and say, "Hey, Rod, you want a Fresca?" Some people know that story. So it's been pretty much your whole lifetime being associated with Chuck.
Yeah, 1979.
Yeah.
We met when Chuck and Cynthia came to the church in Fullerton, and that was in 1971. So Chuck came out to the parking lot with a couple of us middle schoolers and tossed the football with us. That's how I met Chuck Swindoll.
Well, and I first met you, Chuck, at a Salem managers meeting where you came to speak to us. You've come a number of times, but over the years, you have been the standard for Christian programming. I'll give you just a quick example. I went down to Southern California with Ed and Dave to meet a pastor of a large mega church there. He wrote a little book called The Purpose-Driven Life, and we sat down to talk about him coming on Christian radio. And after the meeting, I got back to the car, and Ed asked me, he said, "Have you listened to some of those programs from Rick Warren? How are they?" And I said, "They're good. He's a great communicator, terrific." He said, Ed said, "Are they really good?" I said, "Yeah, they're really good."
Ed said that?
Ed said that about Rick. Yes, he did. And then he said, "Are they as good as Chuck Swindoll?" And I said, "No, they're not." That has been the standard in the halls of Salem for many, many years. There's no question that you revolutionized the entire Christian teaching and talk world with your program at that time, New Standard for Living, right? I think that was the original program, and now Insight for Living. We're so thankful and grateful for all the time and effort that you put into what you did to touch all of us in this room. So once again, thank you.
You're very welcome. And if you had known earlier my response to all of that, it wouldn't be very encouraging, because I could not see myself doing what you're talking about doing.
You kind of came into radio kicking and screaming, didn't you?
What's that?
You kind of came into radio kicking and screaming.
Yeah, I did. I did. I said to Al Sanders, who was in our church in Fullerton, California, nobody listens to Christian radio, Al. He said, "Well, you may be surprised." I said, "Well, I don't." He said, "Well, I'm not surprised about that." And then he said, "I'm going to give you a little sample of what we'd like to do." Handed me a cassette. Remember those? He said, "Listen to this, see what you think." And it was a recording of actually my preaching, and it was a live recording right there. Congregational sounds are included, and babies crying, and people snoring, and all kinds of things going on. And I said, "You're going to include all of that?" And he said, "Yeah, we are." I said, "Nobody does that." He said, "That's why we like the idea." I said, "We think we can break in with a brand new thought." So I said, "Well, I'm not sure, Al." He said, "I'll tell you what. It probably won't amount to a great deal, so we'll cover all the bases, and you won't have to worry about details and all that." Since then, I sliced Al's tires, told him, "What do you mean it won't take much of my time?" Anyway, that's a long answer to say I did not want to do this.
Right about that time, Cynthia was engaged in the ministry. She's been a strategic part of Insight for Living from the beginning.
Yeah. I came home and told Cynthia about it, And I said, you know, if they're serious, and I think he is, I want you to be the one who leads it, because no one knows me better than you do, and I have confidence that you will watch over things like I would want it watched over, and you would maintain a standard that I would expect, you know. And she said, "Oh, I'm not sure." We had 4 little children back then, and she said, "My hands are really full." I said, "I know it, honey." And I was going to go on a quick little couple-day retreat with Kurt, our oldest, as he graduated from high school. We were going to shoot the rapids up in Oregon, in the Rogue River. And I said, when I get back, you just give me your answer, and I'll accept whatever you say. And I got back, and she said, you know, I think I'd like to do this. And I hugged her and said, boy, that's great. Al said it won't take a lot of time, and it won't amount to whole much. So we'll talk to Al about that someday.
Chuck, you're 90, and
Am I?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. But I'm wanting you to maybe look back at the 50-year-old Chuck. Go back 30 or 40 years. Would you have gotten into radio?
Ask me that question again at the end of it. What did you ask?
I asked, if you were 40 years younger, would you get into radio again?
Yeah, absolutely. I would. Yeah, it shows you how dumb I was back when I first told Al I wasn't interested, and nobody listens to that kind of program. I would not hesitate. I really realize over the years that, you know, people who've never met me or seen me or known me will listen to that, because it's the truth from God's Word. And I like it that there's not a lot of programming that has to go into putting it together. You just put another microphone in the pulpit, and I just do what I do. So, yes, I would. Without hesitation.
Good.
You know, it's a risk to turn questions over to this man down here.
To Roger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He knows where all the bodies are. That's the problem. Since I've known him so long. But go ahead. I'm going to give it a try.
I'm not the only one who's had the privilege of working with Chuck Swindoll, so I'm going to say something that represents many of you in this room who've worked with this man. But I'm always glad to tell my friends and those who know of Chuck that this guy's a real deal. And what you hear on radio is you would never be disappointed. I've traveled far and wide with this man, and he's the real deal. He's also very funny. And so I have never laughed so hard than I have with this man, usually at my expense. But humor has not only been a part of his life, but also a part of his preaching. We've all enjoyed that. But Chris and I, as we were talking about that, kind of wondered, Chuck, has there ever been a time as you're delivering a sermon where you've used humor and it backfired on you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the longest moment in the world when you say something that you think is really going to go over well, and people are like, yes, I've had that happen, Raj, and you know about most of them. Yeah,
there was this one I remember in a fundraising event in Hawaii, I think.
Oh, man, it was so stupid in what I said. I said something I've never said before or anything like it. But we'd been invited there by Bill Johnson, who owned the Ritz-Carlton, and we were staying at this lovely hotel, and a number of high donors were there, and along with about 6 or 8 broadcast ministries, and ours was one. And my opening line was my moment, you know. And I said, first of all, isn't it great to be in this wonderful, beautiful hotel? I mean, rather than some roach-infested Days Inn somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And there wasn't much laughter, just like right there. There isn't much laughter. And I thought that would be a funny line. Well, after it was over, surrounding the table where I was the Day family. God. And I loved his opening line. We're the ones who run the roach-infested hotel. I've never, ever said anything like that before. What a stupid thing to say, you know.
Chris, would you indulge me in another story? I think this
Well,
group would...
yeah, there's one. It was, I think it was it may have been a Seattle
That's what I was
radio
thinking of, yeah.
radio rally with us, and Stuart Epperson was there, senior, and you know, of course,
I know where you're going.
Of course, Ed and Stu formed Salem, you know, some 40 years ago, and Stu Senior's the co-founder, and I think you mixed up his name.
You think? The entire evening I called Stu Stan. Well, Stan, I'll tell you what, I really admire what you folks are doing. And Roger and our friend Buddy Williams, now gone, God bless him.
Kurt was there.
You and Roger, you and Buddy were across the table going. They looked like they wanted to kiss me or something.
Stu. We even asked him to pray.
Right.
Stu, why don't
Right.
you pray for the meal?
Right. And I would come
Thank
right
you,
out,
Stan.
well, Stan, tell me how things got started. Roger would go,
Stu never corrected him.
you know, I'm a slow learner, Raj. But I remember now. You are Raj, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure of that.
We're going to go to a little bit of a wild card here. We have two folks in the audience that want to ask a question. We talk with them ahead of time. I think we let you know about this, Chuck. Jim Sanders from
Jim.
Ambassador, that's Al's son,
Yes,
and
yes.
he's now the proprietor of Ambassador. Jim, did they get you a microphone? You got a question for Chuck?
How about a ministry high point, Chuck? Something through your life in the church you look back on fondly.
Period.
Ministry High Point.
Ministry high point.
Yeah. I'm going to surprise you and say it didn't happen in a church. Well, actually it did. It was the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. The Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Krulak, Charles Krulak, he and I had met, and he said to me, Chuck, I'd like you to speak to our graduating class from Quantico, the Marines that are graduating with their commission from Quantico. And it'll take place at the National Cathedral. And my stomach sort of churned as I thought about it, because I'd always seen it on television, had never been inside. He said, a number of us are in need of hearing about integrity. If you would just do us the privilege of the honor of speaking on integrity, we'll make sure that the brass is all there. And sitting in front of me, you got to be a former Marine to feel the pressure of this, is the Commandant. There's only one every few years in the Marine Corps. And General Krulak was there, and along with him, all the generals, many of the generals, many of the colonels, many of the flag officers, they're known as, were sitting in dress whites with all their medals dangling from their chest. And to my left, the most recent graduating class from Quantico, sitting over here. And I stood up and stood there for a moment, and I thought, how in the world did this happen? I didn't say that. I thought that. I thought of all people they could have had here. And he asked me to do this. And so I spoke on integrity. I remember as it ended, there was a part of the drum and bugle corps has a group of people that play the bagpipes. And with kilts and in full array, they come out with the whine of the bagpipes and they play Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And they marched across, and the graduating class marched across as all the brass stood up and at attention. And I thought, this may be the greatest moment of my life. I mean, I didn't have words to describe it when I later told a few people about it. It was wonderful. Wonderful, yeah.
In case you missed it, Chuck did serve in the Marines while on the island of Okinawa during his tour of duty for the United States Marine Corps. Thank you for your service.
Of course. Yeah, of course. That was one of the greatest honors of my life, to be in the Corps and to be trained by those who know how to do it. And you know what? I took so much of that training with me to seminary. And at the time, I wasn't even thinking about seminary. But afterwards, I realized much of ministry is just discipline. It's character traits. It's the things that they drill you into when you're in the Corps. And I realized what perfect training it was to serve. I interrupted you, excuse me.
Chuck, let's take a little turn here. Give us an update on your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and then
Sure.
I would like you to speak a little bit about not just a head count there, but maybe how you've sort of taken on a mentoring role with them.
Sure. We have 4 adult children. They range from 63 down to 54 in age, and all are happily married, and we just love them so much. And they've all provided mom and dad with we're Bubba and Nana. That's our grandparent name. So Bubba and Nana have all these wonderful grandchildren that have been brought into the world and are now, many of them are a couple of, one's reaching 40 and another one's already 42. So they're getting up into adult years and having children in their family. So we have 10 grandchildren and last count, 9, soon to be 10 great-grandchildren. And we just love it. I got the idea, Roger mentioned the mentoring. I was sitting at the breakfast table one morning with Cynthia, and I said to her, you know, honey, I think I'm going to do something I should have done earlier, but I didn't, and I want to start doing it now. I want to mentor a couple of our grandsons. And I chose Austin, who is with his mother, Colleen, our daughter, this morning here in this audience, and Parker, who is the oldest of Carissa's 2 children. I said, I think Austin and Parker, in their 30s, not married, and would be just ready for time like this. At least I hope so. And Cynthia said, oh, I think they would love it. I said, well, I haven't broached it with them, but I'm going to. Well, I did, and they jumped on the opportunity. And every Saturday morning, unless one is sick or has an appointment somewhere else that he can't break, all 3 of us sit together in my study upstairs at our home, And Parker and Austin and I address life. It's without a script. It's without an agenda. Although to kind of keep us on target, we've used a few of my books as a basis. We went through David together, and then we went through a book of Ecclesiastes together. And we're now in character studies, in Quest for Character. And we use the chapter as the basis of our conversation. I said there was no agenda, but that's kind of a guideline for us to follow. And, you know, it's probably the best decision I've made in the last several years. Wow. I just love it. And I just want to say to grandparents here, try not to sell yourself short. Convince yourself, if it takes that they really do want to know about life from your perspective, that they really do admire those of us getting up in years. And I mean, they're taking notes, they're interacting, and they're closer than they've ever been as a result of this experience. And often I'm sitting here watching as they're going back and forth, and it's the most vulnerable, open-hearted, sometimes tearful, and other times just uproarious laughter from the three of us. And it's always done in confidence. So they're safe. And we've dug into I call it the vaults. Everyone has an inner vault that few people know anything about. And you need someone to step into that vault with you and help you untie some of the knots and unravel some of the tangles. And I don't hesitate to say, I don't know, or I've never experienced that. And I learn from them as well as a few things they may have learned from me. I just love doing that. I do. And mentoring is so different, you know, than you would think. You don't have to have all the answers, but you really have more answers than you realize, I think. And when the young are sitting there, they are just silent as they ponder what we are dealing with.
What a blessing to hear that. You know, Michelle and I are proud grandparents of just two little ones. They're too little to learn yet.
Yeah.
But thanks for the encouragement. But on the mentoring topic, many in this room have been mentored directly by you through your radio program and audio content and all your books. I mean, one of the pictures that, Danny, if you can find that picture of Vody Bauckham. Vody was in our suite a couple of years ago, and you guys came and
wasn't that great?
Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. And at the end of the event, I leaned over and I said, "Hey, Vody, would you like to close us in prayer?" And he said, "Oh, I'd be honored to. Chuck's been my mentor for 40 years."
Oh my!
I mean, but there are people all over this room that have been impacted in that same way by those stories. Yeah. Gosh, those stories that you tell. You're such an amazing storyteller. And the laughter. Oh gosh, Danny, find that picture of Chuck in the back of the pickup truck. Oh my God, I mean, it's just like, oh.
That reminds me of when I was in Fullerton, we had some guys show up in three-piece suits and had the clipboards and all ready with their books. They wanted to write in and get the secrets of our ministry and how do you do it? And I said, I don't know. Like a bunch of guys in the back of a pickup trying to get our stuff together. Is that the best way I can put it? And they said, wait a minute, I want to write that down. I said, don't write that down. That's not worth remembering. But when you have nothing to prove and you are willing to be just who you are, which takes half a lifetime to cultivate, people want to talk with you and be with you. I know I want to be with people like that.
That was my follow-up question for you as you're sitting there with those young men and mentoring. As you look back, what advice or counsel would you give to your younger self?
Oh, that's a great question, Roger. I'd probably begin with, don't talk so much. I never learn when I talk. I learn when I listen. So listen better. That's one thing I would say to my younger self if I were to return. I would also add, when you tell people how much you care for them, use the first person singular. I love you. Men don't usually do that. We say, love you. Kind of like you say to your dog, love you. I'm teaching our grandsons, and they say, you know what? We started to do that. I say, use I love you. So when they say goodbye, they say that. And I say it to them. I would express it more often. I often would think it, but I wouldn't say it. And people hear it, and they don't forget that. I would also try to have a little tougher hide. A tender heart, but a tougher hide. Because we're all depraved. And sometime a few of those get in your church, you know. And I remember just, you know, almost forgetting the nice things people were saying and only remembering the 2 or 3 things that someone would say. There would be a little cutting. But I've always remembered the lady who walked by and said to me as she clutched the book in her arm, she said, "Oh, Dr. Stanley, I love this message you brought today. Thanks so much." She said, I brought, she's been sitting through the sermon, okay? She said, "I brought your book. Would you sign it?" I said, "Sure, let me have that book." I wrote Charles Stanley right there. Another time a gal came by and she said, "Oh, Dr. Dobson, thank you so much. You've helped me raise our children." I said, "Well, thank you, that's great." She said, "Your strong-willed child is the best. Would you sign?" I said, "Thank you, I'll sign that, James C. Dobson." So I called Jim that afternoon. I said, "Hey, Jim, guess what I did this morning? I signed one of your books." He said, "Hey, man, don't think too much about that. I sign yours all the time." Isn't that great? You know, I would take others more seriously who are really struggling to get their stuff together, and I'd take myself less seriously, honestly.
What great words of wisdom right there. Raj, I want to just jump in because you made me think of, you know, James Dobson and Chuck Swindoll, Charles Stanley, even John MacArthur. These are men that I heard from Ed and Stu were the kind of foundational partners.
You mean Stan? Oh,
Stan.
Stu.
Yeah,
That's right, Stu. Right.
Yeah. Foundational partners that as Salem acquired radio stations, they went to these programmers to, you know, "Hey, Chuck, do you want to be in Boston? Do you want to be in Washington, D.C.?" and so on and so forth. So maybe it's a good time, Ed, for a question from our executive chairman. He's going to come up later for some remarks, but a question from Ed for you, from the audience.
Okay, Ed, take it easy on me, bud, okay?
I'll be very easy on you.
Okay.
We have this on? So I was thinking about your going back to the Marines and all that you've done, I encountered your ministry when you were at Fullerton. I mean, that was the definitive exposure to me of Chuck Swindoll. And of course, that's when the program began as well. But you left, you went back to Dallas. I can't remember if you began pastoring immediately again or if you took over presidency of Dallas Theological Seminary and then went into the pastorate. But you've done so many things. How would you rate them in terms of fulfillment? I know they were all fulfilling, but
I
can't understand it.
How fulfilling has it been? What's been the most fulfilling?
Oh, shoot. Pastoring a church. That's why I was born. I just love that. Shepherding a flock. It doesn't get better than that. I know others might think something else, but no, that. In fact, when I was, of all things, asked to come to Dallas Seminary and become the fourth president, well, I said no to that 3-4 different times, and they wouldn't quit asking. And I finally gave in and said, "Oh, okay, I'll consider that." Anyway, when I was there, I told them as well as the students, you need to know I'm a shepherd. I'm not an academic. You have faculty full of them. I'm not all that bright. You have administration that's led this school beautifully and will continue to. I'll tell you what I am. I am a shepherd. I've been with the sheep so long I smell like one. You know, I love the world of church work, church ministry, church responsibilities. I'm made for that. I really am. I just love that. That's been the joy of my life, Ed. I was 23 years in Fullerton and a little over 26 years at Frisco at Stonebriar Community Church. And that's 49 years of my life. I never, ever thought, man, I can't wait to get out of this. I mean, there were some hard times, but the great fulfillment of shepherding a flock, having a teenager walk up and say, "Pastor Swindoll, today I learned such and such." I said, "Wow, I'm honored to know that you would remember that." He said, "Oh, my buddies and I, we love the way you talk. You know, you just connect with us." And I just usually hug them, thank them for saying that. Students at the school would say that. And I'm not blowing smoke here. I really mean that. Thanks for asking, Ed, but I've had many, many great privileges, but nothing greater than being called a pastor.
I mean, that is why we love you so much. That's why it works. That's why you are who you are, because you love the local church.
I do.
You love the local church. And that's who we're after, by the way. That's who we want to connect with, people who love the local church, love God's word, and then, you know, that's the most important thing.
I mean, a great church in a neighborhood is like a lighthouse. It's like a magnet. And people who know of your ministry will say to you, "You know what? I kept seeing all these cars drive up, and I was wondering, you know, what's going on in there and all." And they would say different things, but they would come in. They would say, "Man, I got inside and I realized what I've been missing." Isn't that great to hear that?
So great.
I just love that kind of thing. And no, everything that goes on in there isn't terrific, you know. You got to deal with all kinds of issues, and you will. That's part of being a shepherd. But I love the way Psalm 78 ends regarding David. He chose David and took him from the sheepfolds, from following the ewes great with young. He brought them to feed Jacob his people and Israel his inheritance. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart, and he guided them with skillful hands. Isn't that great? He took David, probably hadn't had much schooling. I don't think David was wanted that much by Jesse. I mean, Samuel's looking for a king. He has to say to the dad, is this all the sons you've got? He goes, no, by the way, we got one more. He keeps the sheep as if you don't want, he's the runt. He's the youngest. And call him in, said Samuel. And he came in, and next thing David knew, he's oil running down his neck, and he thinks, what does this mean? And he went right back to the sheep. Isn't that great?
So great.
Most of us would have gone to Nordstrom, started trying on crowns, you know. We'd have found a way to make people know. We'd put a badge on, you know, President-elect or King-elect. No, he went back to the sheep. He took him from the sheepfolds.
Chuck, we've so many questions we'd love to ask you, and in a moment we want to just let you speak to this group from your heart. But one question that came up, what quality of God's character do you admire the most?
His grace. His grace. Oh. You don't know it, but I was the third in a family of 3 children, and my mother didn't do well with small children. And I mean, early on, she said to me, you know, you were an accident. You were a mistake. And I didn't understand that till we started having kids, you know. And all the way through, brilliant older brother, talented sister, and I came along. And in school, I met a teacher, because by then in middle school, junior high we called it, I was stuttering so badly that I never wanted to. Last place I wanted to be was in front of people. Just scared spitless to stand in front of a class. And yet I was memorizing things like poetry and lines from great works, but I never felt comfortable saying it. And we had a new teacher that came to our high school named Dick Nemi. Not a person here has ever heard of him. And Dick came to my locker in the hallway in sophomore year in Milby High School. He said, Charles, I want you in my debate class, and I want you on my theater team. I want you to. I thought he was talking to the guy next to me, who was an all everything at the school. And he's looking right at me. And I said, I can't speak. He said, oh, get this. I'll teach you how to speak. And he did. Grace. Grace. When I wasn't even aware. And I went on to do well there and got to where I could speak in front of people. And he helped me understand that my mind was running ahead of my mouth. I was going further than my mouth could do. Now I have the opposite problem, but I've got to learn how to tap the brakes on that. And he was so careful that summer to teach me how to speak. In the Marine Corps, I had one of my sergeants say to me, hey, Swindoll, come here. They loved to call me Swindoll. And so I'd walk over to him and he'd say, here, stick your arm out. I put my arm out. He put a red armband on it. He said, you're the best leader in our platoon. I couldn't believe that. I'd never once heard that I was a leader. No one had ever told me that. I learned that when I was in the Corps. And after I got out of the Marines, I applied at Dallas Seminary, and I wasn't qualified to go there. I hadn't gone to some prestigious university, and my background had been in a machine shop for 4.5 years, which my dad felt I needed to learn, an apprentice machinist. And then when I graduated as a journeyman, I was in the Corps, and when I got out of that, I said to Cynthia, thanks to the navigator I met on Okinawa, Grace came and he poured himself into me, and I said, honey, I don't know how I could ever be accepted, but let's go and see. So we went, and Dr. Campbell interviewed me and gave me some tests, and afterwards, a couple of weeks later, he called and said, we're going to accept you on probation. And I thought, that is the best news I think I've ever heard, since Cynthia said, yes, I'll marry you. And I just sailed through seminary. I just loved it. And can you believe it? He would accept me. And when he saw my grades after my first year, he goes, well, we've decided to take you off probation. And I said, well, thanks very much. But he said, keep working hard. The courses only get tougher. And they did. But I look back on that grace moment. My life has been punctuated by grace.
Tell us about, you're writing another book, aren't you? And you told me the title of that. I was really touched by that.
Yeah. I'm calling it Awakened by Grace, and it's my memoirs. I didn't think I'd ever do that. I thought dead people get memoirs written about them, and I don't want to be involved in that, at least not right now. And got a good friend named Bill Butterworth, who's my editor, and Bill said to me, if you dictate it, I'll sit right here with you and we'll do this together. And we're over 3/4 through. And I just had dreaded it because I hate focusing on me and my stuff. But I've learned that people are interested in that, you know? And I came up with the title, Awakened by Grace. And that's the story of my life. Awakened by Grace. So that's my all-time favorite character trait of the living God. Right next to it is sovereignty, however. You know, so the Lord's mercies were not consumed because his compassions fail not. They're new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. And oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments. How unfathomable are his ways. That's sovereignty at work. And you often don't know it till after the fact. You look back and you go, that's what God had in mind. His grace mixed with his sovereignty. I'm a satisfied customer, I'll tell you. I really am. I just can't believe it.
I mean,
I can't believe it.
I wish we had another hour, but the hour is gone. We're really coming to the close of our time together, and I think I just want to ask you to impart to us the words you would have for people that work in media, Christian media, people who work, you know, trying to reach others for Jesus with, you know, quality teaching and preaching. For this esteemed group, may not be the last time, but could be the last time you get a chance to talk to them.
Yeah. I'm going to surprise you. That's a question I didn't know I would be asked. Don't forget your family. All of you, I realize, are models of success. I know. If we talk personally and deeply, you would want me to know there's another side. I know there's another side, but basically, you're doing rather well. Probably better than you ever dreamed you would. I know I'm in that category. But don't forget your dear husband or your dear wife and those precious children that God has given you and the grandchildren. Take time. Take time. And as opportunities come along, don't forget to carve out special moments for just your group, your family. Cynthia and I will celebrate 70 years of marriage in June, and when we do, we hope to take a cruise together up in the Alaskan waters, and we chose Michael W. Smith's cruise. He's such a fine man. I love his stuff, but we're not going to go to all the religious meetings. Okay, we're gonna have stateroom family stuff where we just talk together, and I have a chance to tell them again how much they mean to me. Each of our four will come with their marital partner, and Cynthia will be with me. She struggles these days with dementia, and that's such a rude disease. It just comes without invitation and always takes, but never gives. And like my glaucoma, it doesn't get better. It only gets worse. I smothered her face with my kisses last night as I said goodnight. I thank God for her. I would have had her come with me, but I think it would have embarrassed her. And I never want that to happen. Don't feel sorry for us. This is not a pity statement. Just pray that I'll be patient, and she'll be patient with me, and we'll make this 70th year a great one. I owe her so much, Chris. And you know that, Raj. But the one I owe the most to is the Savior. It goes without saying. I was sitting with Cynthia the other morning, and I said, I've learned a hymn for you. She said, I want to hear it. She didn't want me to sing it, because she's heard me sing. Majestic sweetness sits enthroned upon the Savior's brow. His head with radiant glories crowned, his lips with grace o'erflow. His lips with grace o'erflow. He saw me plunged in deep distress and flew to my relief. For me he bore the shameful cross and carried all my griefs. And carried all my griefs. To him I owe my life and breath and all the joys I have. He makes me triumph over death and saves me from the grave. And saves me from the grave. Since from his bounty I receive such gifts of love divine, had I 1,000 hearts to give, Lord, they would all be thine. Lord, they would all be thine. And I looked at her and she said, I love you. And I told her the same. keep close to your family. Regardless of all the people that know you and want your time and respect you. Of course, you've got to do some of that as well. Stay close to your mate and keep saying to your children, I love you.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you 1,000 times. Thank you. I'd like to ask our executive chairman, Ed Atzinger, to come up for some closing remarks before we close in prayer with Dr. Jeffress.
Here's the mic. Okay, gotcha.
This has been quite the event. And Chuck, when I listen to this today, two things come to mind. Brad Parscale mentioned distribution and content. And there's a story of distribution and content for the Christian media that really is represented here. This is what Christian radio was like before Chuck Swindoll. We had a half dozen programs. We had Through the Bible Radio with J. Vernon McGee. J. Vernon would go into his study every day with a microphone and an old Ampex tape recorder, and he'd record his lesson. He did that 5 years to get through the Bible, and he did it 5 times, 25 years of content. But it was produced for radio. And then we had Haven of Rest, which was produced for radio. And we had John Jess did a 15-minute program produced for radio. You had Warren Wiersbe, Back to the Bible, produced for radio. And Al Sanders was in Fullerton for E3. Chuck was preaching. And by the way, God's sovereignty is very evident here. He didn't want to do anything about it. We talked about God's sovereignty and what we just did in our reorganization. You know, if you're faithful to the Lord, He takes care of us whether we cooperate or not. So Chuck was not cooperative. Al said, oh, let me take your tapes, let me see what I can do with them. And he put together a magnificent half-hour program with the finest content, the content that he had worked all week on. In fact, some of the content was a lifetime of study that distilled into that Sunday morning, your best content. And that became Insight for Living, and it changed everything. I remember Al Sanders and Margaret telling me they collected the mail. You know, they didn't think it was going to go very far. They had bags and bags of mail unloaded on their bed trying to count it. It just exploded. And your faithfulness to agree to do that changed everything. So there wouldn't be a Salem if that revolution hadn't taken place, because with all the new content that we got, John MacArthur came with Grace to You, and Charles Stanley came with his program, and they followed this pattern. This pattern changed everything. All these pastors realized my very best material I prepare for Sunday morning. Let me take that and make it into a radio program. And that was what fueled Salem's growth. We wanted to get into the big cities, very hard to get into. Half the population of America lives in the top 25 metropolitan areas, and you couldn't get stations, very hard to get them. And so with great content, we were able to expand and get great distribution. So in a very real sense, there wouldn't be the Salem platform, that's the distribution. And there wouldn't be the content if that breakthrough hadn't taken place with Insight for Living. So it's quite unique, quite unique. And Chuck, we've done pretty well. It's been 50 years. It's been 50 years. You realize that? I launched KDR in 1974. You came along a few years later with the program. It transformed the universe, and we've made a difference. We've made a difference. The Lord used it to impact this culture. And so thank you, Insight for Living. Thank you, Chuck Swindoll. Thank you for your faithfulness, and thank you for not fighting Al too hard to do that program. So, it won't be much longer. So anyway, Stu Epperson and I built Salem together. We were partners. He passed about 2.5 years ago. You know, it was quite the interesting part. You get a good partnership, and it can be a dynamic thing like a good marriage. It's 1 + 1 = 3 in our case. You know, the two of us were much more better together. We're much more productive, and I miss him greatly. But we've created an award in his honor, and we call it this is going to be the 2025 Stuart Epperson Award for Excellence in Christian Media. And I get
Stu or Stan? Thank you. No, I should. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
well, it's a bigger thrill for me to give it to you than for you to receive it. So delightful.